continues to fight to carry this great party forward to victory. Father, Lord, we know that where you are, we are. We ask you this evening to open our hearts, open our minds, open our nostrils, our ears, to take in everything that's said here and done this evening. We ask you to touch each and every one of us in a special way as we are your children. We ask you, Father, Lord, as we continue your work, we ask you to be here with us, on top of us, on the side of us, under us, and in front of us, Father, Lord. This we ask in your precious name. Amen.
Thank you. Please be seated. First of all, let me welcome each and every one of you, wherever you are, including those who may be viewing this online. On behalf of the political leader of the Barbados Labour Party, the parliamentary team, and all those who work with the team, let me welcome you to Grantley Adams House, headquarters of the oldest political party in this country, the very best political party this country has ever had. A headquarters that's located in the beautiful city of Bridgetown, and a place from which many ideas have been generated, ideas that led in the past to a better life for our people, ideas that continue in spite of the fact that we are in opposition to lead to a better life for our people, and ideas that I'm sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, in the not too distant future, will lead to an even better life for our people. It's from right here. This, ladies and gentlemen, is an interesting initiative coming before the commencement of the annual estimates debates in the House of Assembly. And the Barbados Labour Party is very happy to facilitate this forum, which gives the party the opportunity to present to you and to all those who are listening and watching the party's perspectives of the government's estimates for 2016-2017. Did I say estimates? Some say guesstimates. What we're going to be doing this afternoon is fairly straightforward. We have three distinguished persons who will address you, starting with Ryan Straughn, then Dr. Clyde Mascoll, and finally, the leader of the opposition, the Honorable Mayor Amor Mottley. And to set the scene, and I am sure by the time they have completed their addresses to you, you would be in a very good position to determine if it's estimates or guesstimates. Because for 2016-17, government's estimated revenue is $2.7 billion, expenditure roughly approximately 4.4, and the difference between the two, which is the gap that is going this way, 1.6 billion. I'm not an economist, I'm not an expert with figures. I'm sure that by the time you leave here, you will be in a very much better position to understand all of this. And this comes at a time when I'm told that the IMF is warning us that if we continue on this path, that devaluation is a possibility. When the Caribbean Development Bank has been telling us that our fiscal situation is deteriorating. And so without any further ado, let me welcome to the microphone the first speaker to address you. And that person is the former president of the Barbados Economic Society and now a candidate for the Barbados Labour Party. Welcome, economist and comrade, Ryan Straughn.
Good evening, everybody, comrades. Thanks a lot, Jeffrey, for the kind words of introduction. And my task this evening is essentially to open the batting, so to speak. But I have a time frame within which to set the scene, because each and every one of us here this evening, by now, must be asking ourselves, let me be kind, what is going on in Barbados? And that's the best way I can put it, because we have an international audience. There may be children listening, so I don't want to in any way, this is still a family program. And so the things that I would love to say, I really can't say explicitly. But what is going on in Barbados? Now, I'm an economist. I'm now a candidate for Christchurch East Central. So let me say a good hello to all of my colleagues here from Christchurch East Central and the wider party. But what I'm going to speak to you this evening as it relates to the estimates, and it's something that, in spite of the numbers, whatever the numbers may be, and we have grave reservations about the numbers, but I'm not going to bore you with numbers. What I'm going to talk to you about is something called fiscal discipline. Welcome, Clyde. Now, it's not something that is particularly sexy to talk about. It is not. I'm not going to pretend that it is. But it is a very important element if we, the Barbados Labour Party, are going to deliver a better life for our people. It is fundamental to meeting that goal. And so when I look at the estimates, and it's context now, I've kind of lost count in that I'm not sure how many times the Democratic Labour Party has attempted to truly turn the ship around. How many is that? All the time, she says, all the time. And when I assess the estimates at a high level, without getting into the nitty-gritty, and you listen to any commentator from the government side about what is going on in Barbados, and you actually take some time and look at the numbers, there's a distinct gap between what they say is going on and what is happening on the ground in reality. And the challenge for us as a party is to highlight to the public the consequences of that gap between what is being said and what is reality. And I come back to fiscal discipline. Fiscal discipline. Now, in any democracy, obviously run by politicians, the Minister of Finance, yes, whilst being a politician, his job is not politics, primarily. When the economy is growing, you have to be disciplined to maintain growth. When an economy is not growing, the Minister of Finance has to roll up his sleeves, ladies and gentlemen, and ensure that the discipline of government is helping to deliver the goods and services that they say that they're going to deliver for the people. Discipline. Now, discipline comes or takes many forms. It takes many forms. Now, each of us knows full well that at any given point in time, we may not be able to deliver something definitive for our families, our friends, because of circumstances. So we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that. However, when you make an announcement or pronouncement, whatever it is, it has to be backed up with some sense of reality. So if you're telling us that your homegrown economic stabilization program, however long the name is working, is working. What does that mean, is working? And when you preview these estimates, and you ask yourself, okay, the deficit was year high a couple years ago. They introduced some measures, the taxation predominantly. And this is now about 3-4 years systematically that each and every one of us in here would have been faced with some direct tax at a time when we have not necessarily seen any improvement in the delivery of any good or any service from the public sector. So it cannot be working, because if we are prepared to accept that we have to dig deep, whole strain, so to speak, then there must be something that we can point to and say, okay, I have sacrificed because I've been able to maintain some level of quality of delivery of public service in a specific area. Can anybody in here this afternoon or on the World Wide Web point to anything definitive in Barbados that you can say is working right now? Nothing. It's a hard thing to have to say that about your country in the 50th anniversary of independence, you know. And it is not meant to be critical of the government. This is the reality. This is the reality. So when we come back to the estimates now, whether it's water, whether it's public health, Zika, chikungunya, whatever you want to call it, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, okay? There's nothing in these estimates. And that's if you agree that those things are critical. I mean, you have to accept that you have to have priorities. No, I didn't mention crime. I didn't mention crime. But that too is important. But there's nothing in these estimates right now that will suggest to any of you that we are addressing the needs of the country right now. So you ask yourself, you paid the solid waste tax, which I think we marched and rightfully got repealed. You paid the consolidation tax, which incidentally, and I come back to discipline again, the consolidation tax, which was introduced on persons earning over $50,000 a year. It was initially supposed to end March 2015 at the end of the 19-month program. Sounds familiar? So we came last year, around this time, I said, okay, well, things didn't really turn out as we thought, so we're going to extend it for another year. This is the minister here, not me. This is not me talking. This is the minister in Parliament. So you come now and you look at these estimates here, and you see a provision for next year for that tax. So after the repeal now the solid waste tax, they raise the rates on your land tax. So they just switch the tax from one to the next. But mind you, it was supposed to be for 19 months. And that 19 months ended March of last year, ladies and gentlemen. But let me just bring it back to you now here when it comes to discipline, because it is important that we understand that when a minister of finance stands in any parliament, any part of the world, that people must pay attention to what he says, because each and every one of us in here, whether it's for your house or your business, you have to be able to plan. Planning is important to any economy. If you do not know or cannot trust the word of the Minister of Finance, it doesn't matter who he or she may be. Sir, I don't think that that is particularly relevant to the discussion right now. It is not relevant. It is not relevant. I have to disagree with you on that. It is not relevant. I am saying that is an irrelevant fact, okay? Now, whoever he or she may be, the people of the country must be able to trust in what they say. Fiscal discipline requires that. Because if we as citizens dutifully stand up in the lines at BRA, and pay your taxes, sometimes you stand up in the line and it seems as if they don't even want to take the taxes. But we're lawful citizens. You impose a tax. We may not like it, but you pay. But having paid it, the government must deliver. And on any indicator that you wish to choose to concentrate on, any indicator, the government has failed. These estimates is a demonstration of that failure. They call it fiscal consolidation. Now, it's a fancy word, but fiscal consolidation just means that you're trying to narrow the gap between what you earn and what you're spending. That's all. Such to the point where what you're earning could, in fact, be higher than what you're spending. So when you look at these estimates here now, and this is where the direction of the country now is important, and where you choose to spend the money is also important. In January, the governor of the central bank, in his report, indicated that the fiscal deficit, the target for the fiscal deficit, was supposed to be 4%. Sorry, not supposed to be. The target of 4% was within reach by the end of March 2016. That's this month, yeah? That's this month. 4%. These estimates, as currently presented by the Minister of Finance, says that the deficit is 6.3, or will be 6.3. Now, I don't know about you, but if you're telling me that this is your target of 4% and is within reach, I want to know whose reach it is within. Because 2% is a hell of a lot of money to be out into 4 or 5 years of a fiscal consolidation program. But it gets better in terms of the story, the fiction. So the government is allowing us to believe that the fiscal program is working. So remember, target 4%. They're saying, no, the reality is going to be 6.3. But they're presenting a budget here this year for a deficit of 7.8% next year. You remember what I said? Fiscal consolidation means that you're trying to narrow the gap between what you're earning and what you're spending. So, where are we then? Where are we? When you drill down a little deeper, and I'm sure that the others will speak to some very specific areas, but at a broad level, the Minister of Finance has to drive the process. So whatever the government's policy is, his or her responsibility essentially is to make sure that things are under control. Under control. When you present to me a set of data, set of estimates that says that you are going to be increasing the deficit next year, but when you drill down, you recognize there's little or no provision to help alleviate the water woes in the country. There's little, as a matter of fact, you cut the budget for the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. There's little or no provision for any of the other public health areas that are important. As I said, there's little or no provision when it comes to fighting crime, specifically, which we are concerned about. Okay? there's little provision for anything that is going to contribute right now to making our lives better. So I could accept if we were actually going to be very focused and help to resolve some of these issues that are burning in the country. Right now, my garbage hasn't been collected for the last couple of weeks. And I think I might be, my mind may be playing a trick on me because it might be 3 or 4. But whose garbage has been collected in the last week? Yours? And now I see 3 hands out of 4. Okay. And before that, you had to wait. No. We are not even helping, as I said, the public health issues are critical. So you have to set priorities. You have to set priorities. So fiscal discipline means that whatever happens to be the critical issues at the moment, you have to deploy resources to deal with them, because the consequence of not dealing with them effectively in your allocation of resources means that the delivery of public goods and services for the next year will be diminished. And based on the numbers here, they certainly expect to take a lot more revenue from each and every one of us. The revenue estimates are incredible. And without a significant amount of growth in the economy, where businesses are adding jobs, incomes are rising, prices are rising relatively slowly compared to what is being put out in the economy, then I don't see where this revenue is mysteriously going to come. And why do I raise that issue? It comes back to the discipline. If your assumptions for revenue are flawed, and you're basing your expenditure on a flawed set of assumptions for revenue, because the government will spend. The government will spend. They've indicated where they will spend. Now, it's 50 years of independence. We are all proud Barbadians. But, after 50 years of independence, we have to ask ourselves, what are the priorities that we need to focus on now to make the next 50 years better for our children and grandchildren? So the focus right now ought not to be how much money we can spend on celebrating it, but how much money we can spend in making things better for the next 50 years. That is what is the priority now. But we have some short-term issues that we have to deal with. And so the mix between what we are spending for that long-term growth and platform has to be guided by the immediate needs that we have facing us right now. And you can't do that if you've not stopped and taken stock of exactly where you are. Now, if any of, well, I'm sure that we all will recall the taxes that have been levied on us over the last 4 to 5 years. But each and every time the minister comes to the parliament, he gives a new set of numbers. It's almost as if he presses a reset button. So he will tell you that this year, this is what the deficit is expected to be. So it might be 6.3, might be. But then when he comes back next year, if he comes back next year, he might tell you that, well, it was actually 9. So when you go back and you systematically examine the policy of government, at no time has the government got it right. Because if you do not know where you are right now, and you are making policy with 3 or 4% of expenditure somehow out there mysteriously, then it means that the prescription is wrong. Now, if you go to a doctor and he misdiagnoses you, you're going to sue him. He gives you medication. You tell him, well, buddy, I'm really allergic to XYZ, but yet he go ahead and he prescribes the medication. You have all rights to sue him. Now, in our case, we have been misled, because misled from the point of view that they say it's working. But every time you come to the end of the period where you expect relief, because we don't want to be on medication forever. When you go to the doctor and he says to you, well, you have whatever you have, he prescribed the medication, it's a short period of time and you get better and you move on. You don't expect to be, or try this, or try that, the next or the third, unless it's something very chronic. And I'm saying to you, or what I'm suggesting to you, is that anytime a government comes and tells you, well, we got it wrong the last time, so let me try another thing this time, let me try another thing next time, it means that they don't know what they're doing. They do not know what they're doing. They're guessing. And that's where I suppose Jeffrey would make reference to the guesstimates. They're guessing, but there are consequences for guessing, ladies and gentlemen. There are consequences for guessing. And the Democratic Labour Party has bluffed, guessed, pronounced, announced their way through the last 8 years. And all the while, the delivery of public goods and services in this country has diminished. Has diminished. Now, how many people read the paper this morning? Sunday Sun? Most people? Okay. I actually read it like 12:15 this morning, and I was horrified. Because on the front page, I see reference to paying for sea baths. And I'm like, we can't be serious. We cannot be serious. But let me explain why I bring that issue here to you right now. Because rather than, when I read the article in its fullness, it brought me back to something that coincidentally was on the same front page. There was, if you notice, there was a photo of Carol Roberts on the front page as well. I recall 3 years ago, I was on Fair Works, talking about the contribution, economy, and culture, and all these other things. And I asked Carol and Dennis at that time, how much would they pay for a sea bath? So I'm looking at the paper and I'm like, Carol, sea bath, I'm paying for a sea bath. I started to get concerned because the context in which I asked that was with respect to the way that we treat the marine environment and what is the value that we would put to resources like that. And so the fact that the government has not articulated a clear view, because don't get me wrong, when you're in a fiscally tight position, you have to consider all things. But there are certain things that when you consider it is on the table, okay, good, off, it's gone. So the concern that I have now is that with the level of expenditure that we are seeing in the estimates, and it's almost a penchant to find something to tax. Something to tax. I am concerned at the fact that the government has not said, listen, that is completely off the table. Now, I know it's not workable. It is not workable. But as they would normally do, they would try to implement it. They will fail at it. And in the meantime, cause people undue grief, which they have done so far. And it's something that I think that as policymakers and as Barbadians, we have to be mindful that every time someone comes with a brilliant idea that they think it is, we have to examine how practical something like that could possibly be. In much the same way as the solid waste tax was ill-conceived, this is another one of those elements that I believe is ill-conceived. And the problem is when you are feeling around in the dark is because you simply have not taken stock of where you are. The priorities of spending are completely wrong. Completely wrong. And that's just not me saying so. We can feel it. We can feel it. There used to be a time when if your garbage wasn't collected this week, you could be assured that it would be collected next week. And that was an exception rather than the norm. There was a time when our children, having left secondary school, could pursue studies at the Polytechnic, the BCC, or the University of the West Indies of their choice. Okay? There was a time when, yes, there were always some issues with water, but its distribution was never in doubt. But you have to plan. You have to plan. And when you have information available to you well in advance of a situation, you have to take that information and execute the plan that is going to resolve that situation. And as we all know, things come up. Things come up. But there's nothing in here that took the government by surprise. Nothing at all. It is a complete failure of execution. Ladies and gentlemen, a complete failure of execution, a failure of conception on the part of the government. Now, I come back again to fiscal discipline. Discipline. You cannot come in the middle of a calendar year when each and every one of us would have planned our affairs for the most part and say that you're going to retroactively apply tax policy. You cannot. It completely undermines the credibility of the fiscal policy that you say that you want, or the fiscal consolidation, let me put it that way, that you want to achieve. You cannot. And one of the things that the Barbados Labour Party and its members and supporters should be proud of is that each and every time we have had the opportunity to lead this country, we have given people a sense of relative certainty. Relative certainty about fiscal policy. That is important, ladies and gentlemen. That is important. So, as I said, it is not sexy. It is one of those things that in order for any government to be successful in executing any of its programs, stated objectives, the Minister of Finance has to be the anchor. Has to be the anchor. When that person goes out and says anything that relates to tax, to fiscal policy and Barbados, it must be believed. It must be believed that it will be implemented at the time that it will be implemented. But I'm going to leave you with this, because it goes back to, as I said, the context of fiscal discipline. And some of you may not recall, but there was supposed to be a fuel cess announced last year that was supposed to help pay down the arrears of the QEH. Now, this was announced in June of 2015. And this is why I said we are not responding to the needs of the moment. Up until last week, when I checked, that specific policy has not yet been implemented. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want to pay any more taxes. I really don't. But if you tell me that you're responding in this way to alleviate the concerns that citizens have about the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, then you have not just to announce policy, you have to implement policy and follow through. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm suggesting to you, to all those who are listening, that these estimates here, as currently constituted, they're not going to help make our lives any better next year or the year after that. Now, we know that we're moving closer and closer to an election. So it is our responsibility to remind our neighbors, our friends, our families, and even strangers that you see in the street. We have to remind them of the consequence of electing incompetent people. Now, one last thing. Fiscal discipline. Centered in the minister or the Ministry of Finance must permeate the rest of government. Because the Minister of Finance has to play that role. And it is critical when you're in a situation where the economy is struggling to grow by their own policy. But the Ministry of Finance, led by the minister, who may or may not be the Prime Minister at any point in time given our history, that discipline must permeate the government. And so when you look through these estimates, if you don't have anything better to do, that is, when you look through these estimates, you have to be concerned for your children and your grandchildren's future, because none of the standards of living, as I would say, are being improved by any of these estimates. And we have to make sure that we start to focus the minds of our members, of our supporters, in the direction of correcting this problem. In order for us to deliver a better life for our people, ladies and gentlemen, I tell you, we must be adamant that this kind of thing is not right for Barbados. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for your attention. Good evening.
Thank you, Ryan, for a very good opening spell. An announcement: if the driver of G3330 is present, you are kindly asked to remove your car from the present location. G3330. Ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed in the year of Jubilee. It's a golden Jubilee, to be exact. And so you would forgive me if I refer to these estimates as the Jubilee estimates. But I want to take this opportunity to remind all of us, and to remind the rest of Barbados and the government of Barbados in particular, that out of those 50 years, 24 glorious years were presided over by the Barbados Labour Party administrations of JMGM Tom Adams, Harold Bernard St. John, and Owen Seymour Arthur. And you should not exclude us from the preparations and the plans. And I believe that it is time that someone chronicle the activities of those 24 years so that we could demonstrate that we don't only have a fiscal deficit, but there's an implementation deficit when you look at what has been achieved during the 26 years of the DLP and the 24 years of the Barbados Labour Party. I'm also quite sure that when we reach the Diamond Jubilee, that's in 2026, that the Barbados Labour Party would have gone past the Democratic Labour Party in terms of time. More on that later. But to bring us back home, to talk more about the fiscal deficit. is a person, a comrade, a colleague who does not require any special introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, let me invite to the microphone and to the podium, Dr. Clyde Mascoll.
Good evening. Louis, happy 92nd birthday, my dear. A little belated, but the truth is, to understand the estimates of this year, you need to put everything in context. So we need to go back. But the thing that you must first understand is why this administration has failed. It lacks quality, we understand that. But more so than lacking quality, it actually believes that it can fool the people of Barbados. So in 2009, this government embarked on a fiscal strategy. It talked about fiscal consolidation. But let me define fiscal consolidation not as an academic, but as a politician. It meant at the time sacrifice on behalf of the people of Barbados. Sacrifice of the households, sacrifice of businesses, with the express purpose of helping the Democratic Labour Party. Over the course of the last 7 to 8 years, Barbadians have been asked to pay extraordinarily high taxes. They tax everything in sight. It started with income taxes. It moved to taxes on assets. Then they increased the VAT. They taxed everything. But prior to 2013, even though they asked for sacrifice, they took a political decision during that campaign that not one public servant will go home. So the intent of the sacrifice was that all of us will increase our burden of taxation, experience a much lower standard of living while protecting the government. Immediately following the 2013 election, the same government laid off 3,000 workers, so they say. So all of a sudden, once the election had passed, it was okay for them to do what they wanted to do. Since 2013, they have turned to us again and asked us to further sacrifice. So we have seen all kinds of things happening. A people deprived of an increase in their salaries for the last 7 years, civil servants, private sector, everybody, we're still being asked to pay more taxes. They went so far that they conceived of a solid waste tax that the leader of the opposition orchestrated against and had the boldness to say that even if she has to march alone, she will. And what happened? That solid waste tax perhaps characterizes the government, because the government is careful to ensure that every other person sacrifices but the government. So the solid waste tax was deliberately crafted to exclude some people so that the government will not have to sacrifice. And the folly of it was that you were imposing a tax on garbage collection, but you use property values to do so. So if I live in my house alone, somewhere on a hill, I paid garbage tax that bore some relationship to the value of my home, not the amount of garbage that I generated. But that was deliberate, because all around the intention was again that the government will not sacrifice. And you can do the research to check those who were excluded. So Barbadians of all walks of life, with very few exceptions, have experienced a considerable drop in their quality of life. They don't want to admit it. But the middle class has now effectively become the working poor. And I will get to that. Has now effectively become the working poor. So that when you check the estimates that have been put to the Parliament of Barbados this year, you are amazed to see that having asked all Barbadians to sacrifice, including the business sector, the estimates have now been prepared to reverse all of the effort made on the part of the government to so-called fiscally consolidate. So we were told by the Minister of Finance, by the Governor of the Central Bank, that you had to pay more taxes in order to reduce the fiscal deficit. And in doing so, you were trying to protect the reserves at the central bank. Last year in June, the Minister of Finance came to the public and told them that what we have done so far is not enough, but we are on our way to recovery. And then he identified a whole set of things that he still needs to do. They included reducing the fiscal deficit further, reducing the debt, inspiring growth in the Barbados economy, and some other things. So, having gone through a process, people, of paying higher taxes on your incomes, being deprived of allowances that you were entitled to before, paying more VAT, more property taxes, all of these things, plus even the income that you earn at the commercial bank in terms of your deposits, that was cut as well. So what has changed between June of 2015 and January of 2016? What has changed? We are now celebrating failure. So a government has failed by every indicator, but is buoyed by the 50th anniversary of independence and is now prepared to do anything in its sight to celebrate failure. But it doesn't stop there, because I am convinced, given the nature of what I've seen in the estimates, that there's an election coming before 2018. Now, so ask yourself the question, how come you have been asked for the last 7 to 8 years to do everything possible for your country that you love, but now within less than 6 months, the very government that imposed all of the strictures on you is now prepared to relax everyone. So we have no excessive spending in this fiscal year coming. And you'll get some more things. There will be an increase in salaries for public servants this year. There will be some form of tax relief coming this year. I'm telling you what's going to happen. And there will be excessive spending for the so-called independence, and then in preparation for everything else. But what hurts me most is that we have been taken down a path and to do everything possible for our country, and our country, led by this government, has done nothing for us. But let me explain that now, because that too can be explained. The intention was that somehow all these things will cause us to return to growth. So Barbadians will once again, after some sacrifice, after 2008, get an opportunity then to enjoy life. But that has not happened. We have had 7 years of famine. Consistent famine. And whenever you look at it, you ask, so when are we going to get out of this deep hole? The answer was given to you. They said, hey, any day we get an improved performance in our tourism industry, we're going to be on our way to recovery. It came last year. Tourism, so-called, improved by double digits. Yet still, the Barbados economy hardly grew. In fact, the estimated growth is less than 0.5%. And tourism did very well. We were told that once we got increases in tourism, that our reserves will improve. The reserves decline. We were told that once we started to see some kind of recovery, that our fiscal situation will improve. It has deteriorated. We were told that we will no longer increase the debt of Barbados, but the debt has been skyrocketing. We were told that in this country, that even our property values will start to return. Because, let me explain why I am talking to, in addition to all the others, middle-class Barbados. Because historically what's happened is that those in that category, in spite of their difficulties, could go to a commercial bank and say, I have accumulated some equity in my mortgage. Can you extend my loan? And that could be granted. But what has happened? Property values have fallen. Why? Because of the poor economic management. So therefore, previously when one could go to a commercial bank and get a loan as a result of the equity or the improved value in properties, that is no longer happening. So everywhere you turn, we have been asked to sacrifice. But who are we sacrificing for? An inept government, a government that has shown no capacity to get us out of the current circumstances that we're in. And this started ever since, people. This didn't just start. We heard all of the discussion way back in 2010, 2011, 12, 13, 14. All the promises were made. But now we have a situation where overnight, Trevor, there's now all kind of prosperity, so that the fountain of sacrifice that we were asked to pour effort into has now overnight turned into gold. Isn't it remarkable what has happened in this country? So you have a document. I must confess to you now that I have grown very weary and tired. Very weary and tired. It's hard to repeat yourself all the time. it is hard to be saying the same thing about an administration that is obviously incapable and saying the same thing every time. And then there are a few people in the country who have benefited from this country, who remain silent. And their silence is not an indication that things are good. Their silence is an indication that they may be comfortable in their own little spaces and are really prepared not to offend the system, not recognizing that they are sacrificing the future of this country. So that let me start, since they said that an economy is not an important thing, let us look at the social side of Barbados. Your health care. For the first time in your life, you have been called upon to pay fees in order to get access to health care. And there has been a deterioration in the quality of healthcare service delivered at the QEH. There has been a deterioration in the quantity of services available to you, the public, at the university, at the QEH. It doesn't stop there. They turn to the Hill and they say, hey, something is wrong. We are in trouble. So let me try to save $35 million by denying Barbadians access to tertiary level education. It never made sense because $35 million cannot solve or block a whole of $1 billion unless you cut the dollars into very fine pieces and stick them together. It cannot solve. So when I heard that the government is stopping people from going to University of Education to save $35 million, I said, but this doesn't make sense to me. But I want you to think about it not in terms of $35 million spent or lost, but in terms of what it does to deprive the average Barbadian citizen access to university education, which must be and has been the major reason why we were able to develop a middle class in this country, because those of us who came from the very low rungs of the society could not have gone to university in the absence of that access. But this narrow-minded, short-sighted government sought then to impose that on the people of Barbados. At every turn, even on the social side, there's deprivation. But I thought that we were sacrificing such that sometime soon this will be reversed. But it has not been reversed. In fact, when you listen to the talk, you get the impression, supported by some in this society, that somehow it is not government's duty to deliver such services to the average small man in the country. That we are now becoming like the United States of America, where you're going to be deprived of access because there's a perception that once you're from a particular class, you're looking to feed off the system, that you are parasitic. Not that the system owes you an opportunity or a chance to move socially upwards, but that somehow Barbados is now not capable of delivering the very services that it did with ease prior to this administration. In fact, Woody, in 2007-8, you can recall, the same University of the West Indies received more than they, in fact, requested from the then government. And you know that as well as I do. So what happened post-2007-8 to cause such a reversal? It was because you lacked a government that understood its mission. And now what you have is the evidence of that. Don't forget, because we tend to forget very easily in this country, the concept of the fatted calf was imposed on Barbadians. And you know what the fatted calf meant? That once you don't belong to this particular institution, you will not be able to access. And there's an abundance of evidence now right across this government, in the customs department, in fact, in almost every department. And you get it because people still believe that somehow I'm elective politics, so they come up to me. But I don't think that's what it is. I think that it takes time to convince people of truth. Because somehow truth is not a gospel. It takes a lot of time when you're speaking the truth to convince people that what you're saying is right. It is not gospel. That's a mistake. Truth is not gospel. People like to wrap up in anything that is salacious. So if there's a campaign based on talking people's name and who carry who money and who take up with money, that does attract big crowds. And don't let the public fool you that they want issues to be discussed. Because when the issues are being discussed, they do not pay the kind of attention that they should to the issues. And that brings me to another issue. That all of a sudden, in this country, in opposition, you are supposed to provide solutions to problems which the government has created. But that is political madness. And the view that you are being called upon because of the ineptness of this government, that you're not supposed, I even get tired of so-called calling programs. To hear the same people yapping every day, and then the same moderators, so you're now calling. So what is your solution? Solution to a problem you don't understand? Well, how could you provide solutions in 5 minutes to calling hosts when you don't even understand the issue? He himself doesn't understand, but he wants solutions. Because they take these things for granted. They take these things for granted. So the notion then that all you need to do in this country is to come, tell lies, because the greatest liar in the political space of this country is beneath the earth now. It's beneath the earth. He wasn't only a liar. He proved that he was not the most honest either. While he was accusing others of all kinds of things, he was participating in the fatted calf. But time has shown, and that's what time does. Time is perhaps the most wonderful thing in the world. It is the greatest thing that you can give anyone because it has the highest value. And why it has the highest value? Because the opportunity cost of it is the same for everybody. Let me explain. You can have a lot of money, and the money can differ. But whoever the Almighty is gives us the same 24 hours in a day. So therefore, time is the most precious thing there is on the face of the earth. And with time comes responsibility. This notion too, I listen to them now. This young lady that is the leader of this party has been prepared for it at every turn. So how come all of a sudden she's incapable of leading this country? Huh? And all kinds of people who never took the opportunity or time to prepare themselves stumble on leadership positions in this country. And you're telling me what? That this young lady who has held almost every post that is important, whether it was the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Culture, Attorney General, Minister of Economic Affairs, Deputy Prime Minister, and you are saying to me, in this weak group, in this underperforming group, in this Second 11 team that is in Parliament, that this young lady who has been prepared is not among the most worthy? Am I to believe that? Because, nah. You see, the thing about it is that perhaps I wasn't really cut out of that mold. Because I believe in truth. And I believe that if you're steady in telling the truth, that someday, very soon, people will recognize it. But the beauty about the truth is that you don't have to have a memory. You don't have to recall what you said. That's the beauty in the truth. So I come here today really to tell you that don't worry about any estimates, because they're not important. They are not important, because every year, the Minister of Finance fabricates the revenue collection. He overstates it deliberately. He never gets it. Every year, he understates the expenditure. Deliberate. The intention? To send a signal to the people, not only locally, but abroad, that we are, in fact, performing better than we are. And then over the course of the year, you manufacture an outcome. It's all intended to mask the reality. So people, you have a duty. You have a very simple duty. And let me tell you, let me end. You want me to end yet? Let me explain what it has become. The supporters of the Democratic Labour Party are indeed shamed. They are not at all happy. They cannot be happy. If they are happy, they defy logic. So the issue is this. Since we are not happy with what we have, given that it is ours, whatever we see over there cannot be good enough either. So what you do is that you shift the emphasis away from your lack of performance onto the pending or the possible replacement. And that's what the politics has become in Barbados. So when they see me, they come to me. You know, I was on the other side. But I am as straight as they come. In every respect. In every respect. I'm as straight as they come. You can't question me on anything when it comes to straightness. All right? Can't be questioned. So the issue then becomes, well, you know, Massey, these fellas ain't doing so good, but. And then the but becomes, you know, Mia. I said, what? Well, how come you're so virtuous all of a sudden? How come you're so, you mean this is what matters to you? And then the thing, you know, it breaks down. I suppose they expect a different response from me, see? You know, because we live in a very hypocritical society. You understand? So they must expect a different response. So when they say, no. Let me explain to you, my friend. In politics, governments lose the election. There are very few instances in which oppositions win anything. People get tired of governments. Barbadians are tired of this government. Yes, they're tired. It's simple. They want to get rid of this government because of lack of performance. On every indicator, the government promised jobs, they have not delivered on jobs. In fact, the unemployment rate has risen. There has been no growth. In fact, the Barbados economy is now smaller than it was in 2007-08. Those things are there, but I tired of the numbers. You see, people, I've gone past the numbers. It happens. When you're younger, you get very excited with these things, and then as you mature and grow and get philosophical, you look beyond numbers, because numbers can be fabricated. You heard a lot about the central bank and foreign reserves. We had more reserves at the central bank when this side was calling for stimulus than we have now. But when we called for a stimulus to help the people of Barbados, we were told that it would ruin the reserves. And the economic advisors, the one at the central bank, and then the other fella, won't call his name, came and said, but you know what? The BLP is proposing cannot work. And all of a sudden you heard that they're now planning to have a $600 million stimulus. But don't expect to see it, people. What's happening is that you're governing by stealth. That's what it is. You understand? There's no focus. So when you check these fellas and evaluate them, using all the indicators that we've used over the years, they have failed. But they don't want to accept failure. So what we're seeing now is an attempt to now make Barbadians happy. I pass, and even the Christians now being pulled in. I don't believe that Christians should run it after any free concerts. It seems to me inconsistent. But why? So why you need to have people from Brooklyn to sing in Barbados? To sing gospel. And you pass Kensington, you see the people rushing to go to a free concert. And I ask myself, I said, but Clyde, you mean that even the Christians want to be celebrated? Even the Christians want to have their form of calypso and merriment? When they should be contemplating where this country is truly going and what has happened in terms of our social life and standing, what has happened to the decay in the society. They need to restore the Christian faith. They need to make people see the church as something that is attractive once again. But you mean that even them now succumbing to this nonsense? That you have a situation in which you offer a free concert now, and since you had one to jump up and play mass, you got one now for the more docile. I find it fascinating. That's the truth. Really, really fascinating. I smile. In fact, I really do smile to see what's happening. You see, because we were promised a lot. We were made to sacrifice a lot. But when we look at the evidence, even if we don't want to admit it, people, with very, very few exceptions in this country, we are all worse off than we were 8 years ago. With very, very few exceptions. And I can end, let me end by just indicating. You see, I came up in a household that was very big. A 3-bedroom home, 18 people. I have 26 brothers and sisters, by the way. I know what it is to go outside to the bathroom. And lots of us do. I know what it is to bathe in front of the village. My mother scrubbing me on a Saturday because she said, Clyde, you don't bathe yourself well enough during the course of the week. So you can bathe in front of the village. With blue soap, sometimes Tide, and but if there's one thing sometimes that saddens me about the politician is this desire to see everything in terms of the small man and the poor man and the belly aching about the small man. You know who's the small man now in Barbados? The working poor. Not that people down below are hurting, because they are, and they by right have to hurt. But let's look at who pays income tax. Anybody earning over $25,000 per year. Who pays property taxes? Who pays the majority of taxes in Barbados? We designed a tax system over the years to give relief to people at the bottom. We introduced a reverse tax credit to make sure that people who earn less than $18,000 per year would get back something at the end of the year. It was $1,300. It has been reduced to $650. Not now. But that's why I want to end on this. So when you look at it, people, the most damaging thing ever done in the history of this country to the people of this country was done last year in June. You know that a tax system is designed deliberately to encourage people to at least own a piece of the rock. You put systems in place to make sure you can claim back on the interest paid on mortgage. You put systems to make sure if people have a problem with health, they can have access to some things. You put systems in place to encourage people to invest in retirement savings plans. You put systems in place generally to help households, help the vulnerable, whether you're old or whether you're a child or whatever. And last year in June 2015, a minister of finance who has the propensity to cut with the touch of a paper, not a knife. You only got to bring a paper across the skid and you will cut. If you look in today's Sunday Sun, at the back page, you will see evidence of it. Came to the people of Barbados and took away every conceivable thing that we fought so hard over the years to put in place for the people of Barbados. So let us not only see the politics in terms of the poor man, but also, my people, in terms of who has genuinely become the working poor. It is time to appreciate what is happening in this country, that we are on a course of reversing almost everything we fought so hard to achieve between 1966. I go there deliberately, not because Barbados started in 1966, and 2007, that has now been systematically reversed by an administration that lacks depth and competence.
Wow. Thank you, Comrade Clyde. Swing bowling from one end, pace bowling from the next end. Wow. But ladies and gentlemen, let me assure you that the Barbados Labour Party parliamentary group is a team, a formidable team. We back from 1 to 13. We may not play the same 11 all the time, but we play the team. We play the team. And I want to say to the team that the battle is won or the battle is lost by the spirit of the team. I wish that we were already debating the estimates right now with the kind of support that we have here. But we're not. Ladies and gentlemen, the estimates commence tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, the Minister of Finance will do his thing. And whenever he is finished, the leader of the opposition, our party leader, will do her thing. And that will be followed by presentations, and the debate will continue after that for the next 4 or 5 days. And I'm asking you on behalf of the captain and her team to come out in numbers and give us your support as we take this battle, this fight to the government. I also ask you to support the team on April 17th, Sunday, April 17th. That is our annual church service at St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Cathedral at 11 a.m. And that will be followed by a luncheon right here at Grantley Adams House at 1 p.m. Tickets available at $50. One last announcement. This is for the Women's League of the Barbados Labour Party, who will be presenting their 2016 Women's League Convention entitled "A Strong Family is the Foundation of a Strong and Sustainable Economy." This exciting event will take place on Saturday, May 7th, 2016 from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Living Water Community Evangelization Center at St. David's in Christchurch. Many prominent speakers, along with information-packed workshops, will fill the agenda. Registration fee, simply $30. Please contact the Assistant Secretary, Ms. Herbert, at 624-7713 for further details. I told you earlier, ladies and gentlemen, that come the Diamond Jubilee 2026, that we would have surpassed the Democratic Labour Party in terms of the amount of years that we would have been in charge of the political leadership of this country. But in order for us to do that, it means that we would have to get there. And in getting there, we would by then equal the Democratic Labour Party in terms of the amount of prime ministers. 4. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, let me introduce, or invite rather, the captain of the team. The person earmarked to be the 4th Barbados Labour Party Prime Minister come that Diamond Jubilee, to address you on the estimates 2016-2017, the Honorable Mayor Amor Mottley.
You agree with me that the Barbados Labour Party has only ever had class in the city of Bridgetown? Good night, ladies and gentlemen. I want to start this evening by thanking you for coming out here and allowing us to share our perspective with you on the eve of what is really a constitutional necessity. One that even if the government was not ready for it, they have to do it. And they have to do it because government must set its budget through its expenditure and its revenue in place by the 31st of March. But even as we prepare for yet another year, I want to thank Ryan and Clyde because I thought it was important to remind the country, not the members of the Labour Party, because you know the class that we have in these two men, but to remind the country as to what is really taking place in Barbados. And Clyde said it just now, that these estimates that have been laid in Parliament, if we were not a respectful people, they may well do better by being recycled for some other purpose, because a lot of good trees have gone to waste in what they have printed. And a lot of good trees have gone to waste because it is political window dressing as usual. The revenue numbers make no sense. And Ryan issued a statement yesterday legitimately asking for the assumptions on which they are based. Because we used to think they were bad in the last few years. But their estimates tell us that revenue has gone down by 2.5% at the end of January this year. The 31st of January, less revenue was collected than the 31st of January last year. But then they go on page 2, and tell us that by some miracle, in spite of the fact that revenue is down, less than 6 weeks ago, that they are going to collect in February and March $802 million in 2 months, a figure representing 30%, 30, of government's overall revenue for the year. So what you couldn't do in 10 months, you're going to do now in 2 months. Now, you know, joke is joke, but damn joke is no joke. Because we thought they were bad, Clyde, in 2008 and 2009 and 2010, when they overestimated and told us they'd collect 22% of government's revenue in those 2 months. They never did. 2011, they said they're going to collect 15% of government's revenue in February and March. Even then, they overstated it by 60 million. 2012 and 13, they said they were going to collect 22% of government's revenue in 2 months again. They overstated it in by almost 200 and something million, near 300 million. So why are we, as Clyde just told you, to believe that what you couldn't do between 2008 and 2015, when you were telling us that in February and March you could collect 1/5 of government's revenue, that all of a sudden now, Woody, they're going to collect 1/3 of government's revenue in February and March. And even if we give them a figure of $95 million for something they say is investment income, but the contempt that they have for us is that they don't even give us the explanatory notes for what it is. But we are to go in there tomorrow and debate figures that are not even explained to the people of this country. But that is what this Democratic Labour Party government has reduced Barbados to. A country that for all of the first 40 years was treated as a beacon that could be respected for financial order. And Ryan is really being a bit too modest, you know. But I have every confidence, the longer you spend on the wicket, the more you will start to bat your shots. This was the gentleman on the eve of the last election who produced a document that said, look, between 1955, when Grantley Adams was premier, and 2007, this country, Barbados, only ever spent more than it earned in terms of its current spending, its day-to-day spending, on 6 occasions. You understand that in 52 years, 51 to 52 years, it only ever happened in 1962. Never under Grantley. Never under the Labour Party, 51 to 61. Once in 62 under Mr. Barr. Once in 74 under Mr. Barr. Once in Tom in 76, because Tom took over a very sinking ship and raised it. 1989 under Mr. Sandiford. 91 under Mr. Sandiford. You understand that it was an odd thing? It was something that the boy didn't even remember. It wasn't even something to remark upon, because if they barely step on the crease, Mr. Barr, I said Grant, he never did it, so I can't call his name. Tom, at the beginning, never did it again. Mr. Sandiford, he did it twice, and we knew how many of y'all paid the price for it. But what was an aberration has now become the stock in trade for this government. 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and God help us, 2016. How does a country that is known for good behavior become worse than the worst wild boy when it comes to fiscal matters? How does a country sit back and allow a bunch of people to take what does not belong to them because they're only there in trust for you and me and the rest of us, and they allow them to take it and fritter it away incompetence, uncaring, and worst of all, corruption. And we sit back and we come because the Constitution says we must do so. And we take up this yellow book, and as Clyde says, we exercise in an activity that is more for the outside world than it is for you. Because when done, this yellow book still says that the Queen Elizabeth Hospital getting $9 million this year. And worse than that, this yellow book says that the QEH will not get the 185. In other words, it is getting $40 million less than it needs. This yellow book says that the University of the West Indies better hold the belly. Because if they thought the 240 or the 280 million, because you can't even get clarity, but we know it's 200 enough, that if you thought that that was all you would be owed, this yellow book says brace yourself for another 30 to 40 million dollars in this fiscal year, because we are only voting the 71 million and not the 110 million that you need. This yellow book says, don't mind, and Jeffrey will speak to this in the debate, don't mind the National Housing Corporation needs $44 million to function, and that it raises less than $10 million in revenue from rents. Because remember that all the houses almost are not paying rent anymore. But this yellow book says, don't mind you need 44 and you're only raising 10 on your own. We only giving you 5. So what happens to the remaining 29 million? This yellow book says Transport Board really needs 40-something million a year to run, but we only giving you 20. Ladies and gentlemen, the political games have started. The political circus has started. And this government has shown by this book its intention that it is in election mode. You heard Jeffrey regret and comment on the fact that in spite of a 50th anniversary of Golden Jubilee celebrations, a political party, and that is why we have called this meeting here at our headquarters, a political party that knew what it was to manage and lead this country with distinction for 24 years, was not even invited to participate or to be informed as to what the Golden Jubilee celebrations are. But as you cut the hospital, $7 million, as Dougie told you yesterday, goes to independence celebrations, Democratic Labour Party independence celebrations. Just under $2 million in this year that will close on the 31st of March, and $5 million to come between now and November to be spent. This yellow book tells us that the government still has no capital program, really, Clyde. That the majority of what is down as its capital assets is really a contribution, almost half of it, to the sinking fund, to repay debt. 142 million of the 360 million is to the sinking fund. And what is the government's capital program, pray tell? You know when Tom Adams, Bree St. John and Owen Arthur had capital programs because you saw it, the Bridgetown Port, the Oysters Fish Market, the airport, come on and go down the road. What is the government's capital program this year? $80 million that it has to give the Chinese for Sam Lord's Castle. Because don't mind they went and broke ground in September. You know they're groundbreaking experts. Pickering in St. Lucie, Peter. Nothing still ain't happened. The break ground, Dennis Lowe went low to break ground in Vaucluse for the Sanitation Services Authority. And building didn't start for 6 months. And then when it started, it done in 7 months because the government didn't give the people the money to continue. One signed the loan agreement. So that building has now had no work done on it in Vaucluse, the Sanitation Services Authority headquarters, for over a year. But out of this groundbreaking in Sam Lords last September, you would have thought that the groundbreaking then would have led to jobs for the people in St. Philip. You would have thought that ground would break. Well, the people in St. Philip better hold, because Chinese come in to build that too. It's about $80 million in here for that. And then the DLP program unfolds in the roads program. Because the next big item, and really only big item after Sam Lords, is the roads. Money from Latin American Bank, CAF, money from IDB. Well, the IDB money for the roads is to do highways. And I do not know, and I have never written as Member of Parliament for St. Michael Northeast, and my constituency assistant, Lavon, is here, and she certainly has not received instructions to write about a road from Canewood to Lower Estate roundabout. Because, Ms. Gill, the last time I checked, there are no people living on that road. It is only ready mix and pre-Conco. So the people in Canewood Hill that have had to deal with dust for the last 7 years, because the Barbados Labour Party, in good faith, started a road for the people in Canewood Hill. And this government stopped the road. And those people have had to live with dust or mud, depending on whether it's dry or wet. And you're going to go and take up money from an IDB road study and go and carry it in front of Cow Williams and Mark Maloney's pre-Conco when they're running heavy trucks and should be paying for that road themselves? You understand when I tell you uncaring? But that's not the political program. The political program is now to be found, and if I were a member of the Democratic Labour Party, I would get vexed too, because they have clearly chosen their first 11 as to who is to receive. In these estimates, the Latin American Bank, $20 million, the cabinet approving for roads to be done. 1 whole million of that 20 million going to a consultant alone, you know. And the other 19 got to fight up with the roads. And where are the roads? Dennis Kellman, take a bow. He gets Bostic. Frundell Stewart, Prime Minister, but he's a big man. He got to get peace. And Richard Seeley on his border in Britain's Hill. Adriel Braffett in Gemswick, make noise. Dennis Lawson, not bout here. Don't mind Sears Court to Wilcox Hill is nowhere near the worst roads in Barbados. That got to get done. And Michael Lashley tells you, Skipper, Eswick in Lowthers. And Michael Lashley said, well, I'm the minister. Out by Chapel got to do, even if there are enough houses that can benefit. You understand that the people in Friendship behind BIM were waiting for 8 years. That road was placed in a contract with Rayside Construction by a Barbados Labour Party government in August 2007. This government took it out. And the people every year, you see Friendship Terrace in this yellow book, and every year, not a yin, not a yang, not a movement in Friendship Terrace. But the lineup for elections has started, and the parish pumping is on its way. And the independence celebrations, Chris Sinclair told you, goods and services must be cut. But you are now spending, Clyde, I just showed you the figures, 120, 130 million more than 2 years ago in goods and services. You can spend $5 million on independence celebrations. At the hospital, I just left the hospital this afternoon, bounced up Chris Sinclair too going in. He asked me, I thought you were out there abusing me already. I said, not yet. And I said, but I realize you're coming to count how many ceiling tiles missing. With ceiling tiles missing in a hospital, it must gather dust, Clyde. And if dust and bacteria gather in a hospital, what's happened? Infection. And look, this gives me no pleasure to speak in this way, because what we have is a government that wants us to believe a farce. This is hope at best. If you wanted to be charitable, you would call it hope. You would call it hope, optimism. But we all know that there is no strategy in hope. And at worst, if you have been like us seeing the same thing over and over and know that they ought to know better, you would call this deception. Deception being foisted on a people for an international audience to say Barbados is on the right track. Barbados has turned the corner. Ask the people in the hospital if they feel the hospital turned the corner. Ask your grandchildren and children who want to go to UE and who are now having to look for jobs that are not there because they cannot go and study whether this country has turned a corner. Ask the people who rely on the transport board bus to get to work for a day's pay and end up getting to work 2 and 3 hours late if this country has turned the corner. Ask the people who cannot get the little help that they're accustomed to from welfare. You imagine that in the middle of this financial year, this government pushed back up welfare benefits to 15 million. And like a thief in the night, at the same time that they were unlawfully drawing down $30 million from the Housing Credit Trust to pay Mark Maloney for a building that is shut up at the grotto for the last 20 months, they went and cut welfare's vote by $1 million off of 15. Good Lord. 3 nights ago, a gentleman came in here on crutches. Could not get help from welfare. His foot was run over by a PSV. Can't work. I can't get a cent. I instructed my office to write welfare about him. He came Friday afternoon again to the office. The young lady you saw in the paper, Cynthia and I have been trying to deal with her. And in the middle of the night, this yellow book this year, because the colors change every year, going to cut welfare by $1 million and then tell me you're going to put it back up to the 15 you gave last year, where we know when you're looking for space and money to cut for somebody else, you have already shown your hand who is the first to get the slap, who is the first to get the chop. We have to move beyond this in this country. And there's been much debate in the last few days about the true state of the Barbados economy. And it will be in the next few days. Regrettably, the estimates has become a political talk shop rather than treating to the affairs of the people of the country with the seriousness that is merited. We have said that there's need to be for it to be reformed, and that you need to have the permanent secretary and the technical officials come in the well of the house and answer the questions about why do you want us to vote this amount of money for you to vote, to spend, and what will you be doing with it? And we have to be settled that when we believe that we are going to rake in X amount of money, that we rake it in, that we get it. And that we are not just approving something, then to find that the deficit and the debt has gone up again. And that we are in the unfortunate situation of a central bank holding over $1 billion in government paper. You know how much? Printing money. You know how much it was when we left government? $20 million. It is now $1 billion. $1 billion. The only thing good about billion is that it starts with B like us. The National Insurance Scheme, when we left government, had $1.4 billion in government paper. The workers' money, because Don't call it the NIS. It is the workers' money. It is your money. It is your pension. Today, the end of December, $3.2 billion in government paper. And I want tonight, therefore, to pause and talk about this. Because we are going along and allowing this government to pull the biggest hoax on the people of this country. And we want to believe, well, they are ministers, so you have to give them respect, and they must be telling the truth, and they must be orderly. But we are here to testify and to give you the evidence that everything that they have said they will do, they have not done. Every test that they have put us to, they have failed. And tomorrow I will speak in detail, whether it is an hour, 2, 3, or 4 hours on it. But I want tonight, before we go, because Ryan put 15 questions on him. And the minister can't come and give a set-piece speech tomorrow morning like if it is he painting the background of everything sweet when I know and you know that it is not so. And by his own admission, a man that said he was asking you to bear this burden, take it on in August 2013. By December, 3,000 of you gone home. Reverse tax credit gone. And why did he tell you he wanted you to do it? Because he wanted to bring down the deficit. You heard Ryan talk about it tonight. And then the central bank governor comes and says, oh, don't mind even the 6.3, the minister telling you about 6.6. We feel it should be down to 4%. And what do we get? A deficit that is still understated based on a projection of revenue, Woody, that may never come true. 30% of government's revenue in the next 2 months is what is needed to get that deficit target. What Clyde tell you? It is numbers, it is numbers, it is numbers. Throw anything there, throw anything there. But when you throw anything there, when they act in that way, it is their actions, but it is our consequences. It is their actions, but it is us feeling the pain. It is their actions, but it is our turn when they fail to pick up the stuff and literally have to sacrifice that which you don't have any more to sacrifice. And then they come next year, not our figures, his figures. Don't mind that I told you in 2013 that the deficit was too high when it was 9. Don't mind I had to do all these things to bring it down, send you home, take away the credits, bam, 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 bam. You know how much he's begging you to carry it up to next year? 7.8%. But 7.8 must be more than 6.3. If you're going down, why are you going back up? If you're going down, why are you going back up unless you are a contortionist? So, that is a reversal. And we are going to sit back in this country and sit down and say, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, minister, yes, sir. 3 bags full, sir. You understand why you don't talk often now? You understand why you don't talk often? Because people have to use their eyes to see. And I am saying to you that now that I can see these estimates, I see the Democratic Labour Party political campaign because there are only 2 years left in which to have estimates. This year and next year. And they intend, in spite of how broke the government is, to use it to their advantage. And they can only do so if we zip up, keep quiet, and say nothing. And I ain't only talking about the people in Parliament. I'm talking about each and every one of you Because you have mouths to open too. The calling programs, the letter writing, talking about the church. I talking about the private sector. I talking about the labor movement. Because at some point, if a man keeps doing the same thing to you over and over and over and over and over in the same way, and we do nothing about it, don't we become complicit and accessories to the action? Well, I can call them out. And in addition to Ryan's 15 questions that speak to the figures, I want a few for him to answer tomorrow morning before he sits down in his speech. Because I don't want to come and hear all kind of fancy rhetoric designed for an international community. I want to hear what matters to you and you and you and all of us in this country. I want to hear about the workers' money that is being put in peril. I want to hear why this government, if it has so much money, has these institutions that ordinary Barbadians depend on every day in the state in which they are. And it brings me to the point of the National Insurance Scheme. You heard me tell you just now that the National Insurance Scheme owes $3.2 billion. Sorry, has $3.2 billion in government paper. And this government keep on fearing the workers' money and the workers' scheme. Because as we speak tonight, the government of Barbados, through central government and the statutory boards, owes the National Insurance Scheme $240 million. Now I know about all of the rest of us in the private sector, because all kinds of businesses owe too, because things hard. But when you hear them talk, Chris is the one telling you it is rosy. And when they do pay anything, because they owed them $240 2 years ago as well, or $220, and instead of paying them in cash, they give them government paper. They swap out the debt for the paper. Not cash, but the NIS need cash to do its business. If not, it is going to have to keep drawing down. And what they have not told you is that by presiding over an economy that has so declined, that a situation that should not have happened until 2018 has now fallen upon us. That the expenditure that the NIS spends in benefits is no more than what the NIS takes in. That the expenditure that it spends in benefits, that it is spending more than it taking in from you in contributions. Now, we expected that to happen by 2018. And we do know, because of how Barbadians' demographic profile is, that there are going to have to be some things that we will have to look at and adjust. But this government so performed over this economy in such a dismal way that what should have happened in 2018 has been happening since April 2013. Now, against the background of all of that, forcing NIS to take up money and buy government paper so that they could continue to do the things that they want to do, not for the benefit of the whole country, the NIS has been put almost in a prostrate position to respond to them. But this is what concerns me. In January of 2014, the Minister of Finance directed, and he would only have to direct the NIS board if the NIS board was not willingly coming to the transaction. Not true, Clyde? The Minister of Finance directed the National Insurance Board to take up $55 million of the workers' money and to lend it to Barbados Tourism Investment Inc., BTII, to buy the property at Ammon at Haywards from the Trinidadians. Remember the Trinidadians owned it? At Ammon Village, Speightstown, St. Peter, BTII borrowed $55 million to purchase this property from the NIS. Now, if I borrow money from you, I sign a loan agreement. And the loan agreement said that if that property were ever to be sold, BTII agrees to pay back the money that it borrowed from the workers' money to the NIS. Sound fair, doesn't it? Normally, if it was anybody else, the NIS would put a formal mortgage in place and register the mortgage. You go to the bank, you borrow money from the bank says, I want a mortgage on your property in case you don't pay me. True? In this instance, NIS, for 18-month, 2-year transaction, 2 years, did not put the formal mortgage in place. Well, I hope they have now learned their lesson. The loan was to have been repaid on the 31st of January of this year. 4 days before the loan was to be repaid, on the 27th of January, the NIS gets a letter from the Barbados Tourism Investment Inc., BTII. And that letter sets out very clearly, we know we owe you money. And we know we borrowed 55 million. But further to our discussions with the Minister of Finance regarding the matter of the $55 million borrowed from the NIS, and as directed by the Minister of Finance, by him, the Barbados Tourism Investment Inc. is now formally requesting a rollover of the bond for 18 months, which is due in 4 days' time on the 31st of January. Now, pause. Do you know that the National Insurance Board is a separate legal entity with its own board and cannot be treated as the same thing as any entity in central government? Are you aware of that? It is as different as I am from Jeffrey Bostic. We may be both Labour Party people, but we are two separate human beings and two separate legal entities. And what the NIS receives is a letter telling them they're the borrower, you know. It's like you going in the Royal Bank and say, I have money for you, but guess what? I am paying you. You will get paid in 18 months' time. No conversation, no consultation. But it gets worse, because the BTII attaches a letter from the minister that they wrote the Minister of Finance. And in that letter, they have the temerity to admit that they went to cabinet. Not in January of this year when the NIS is being told 4 days before the loan is due, but in May of last year, 8 months before the loan is due, the BTII, through its parent ministry, goes to the cabinet and says, you know that money we have for national insurance? We want you to agree that we don't have to pay it back now. Would you believe that they didn't even go and consult national insurance scheme? So 8 months ago, all behind the back of the workers' money, the entity designed to protect the workers, and the minister who has a responsibility as Minister of National Insurance, Esteban Saku, a member of a cabinet, would have at some point, whether she was present then or thereafter, had the opportunity to say to them, do not touch the workers' money. You borrowed it, pay it back on time. And what is more, the loan agreement which you signed said that if you ever went to sell the property, you would have to pay it. And you would have to get the consent of the National Insurance Board to sell the property in the first place. Well, they sell it. They get the money. They went to cabinet in May and decided that they ain't paying the NIS in January. And then they write the NIS 8 months later, 4 days before the loan due, and say they ain't paying. This is not how business is done in Barbados. And the cabinet, to the extent that the cabinet agreed that the proceeds of sale from the Ammon Haywood's property at Sandals be used to pay off, be deferred from paying off the NIS for the $55 million, the cabinet acted without lawful authority because the cabinet was not a party to the loan agreement. And the only body who could say that they were ready to vary the terms and conditions is who? The National Insurance Board. And as if that were not enough, they then turn around, don't tell NIS until literally the eve of when the money is due. Now the NIS has plans for how to invest your money because you don't ask the questions, they don't answer the questions. When you go to collect your check, you expect to get it. They can't say cabinet told us do X because the law puts the burden on the directors of the NIS. And what we have in this country is government by wild action. This is the same point I made in the budget last year. When the government went and took up $30 million from the Housing Credit Fund, an institution designed to be able to help finance entities so that you could get access to mortgages. And they take it up and put it to pay off Maloney for the grotto. And the bush is about 2 foot high still after 20 months and not a fella living in the grotto. It was an unlawful act. And I got cursed in the budget for it. But less than 2 months after the budget, the Solicitor General come out and tell them that they acted unlawfully. And I say tonight now that the cabinet decision of May 25th last year telling the BTII, that it did not have to pay back the NIS on time or upon receipt of the sale proceeds from Ammon Beach Village, Haywood, Speightstown, was also done without lawful authority. And the minister who is to protect the national insurance scheme and its integrity, Esteban Suku, even if she saw them running in that direction, her duty was to protect your money, Miss Lowe. Her duty was to say, not about here, and that this is unlawful, and the cabinet has no jurisdiction to act in this way. But I go further. What you do with the $55 million? Was the $55 million so urgently needed? And the Minister of Finance needs to answer this. Was it so urgently needed to save lives? So in addition to the unlawful act of cabinet in encouraging BTII not to pay back national insurance scheme on time, can you tell us what you did with the money, the $55 million? What did BTII do with it? Because the public of Barbados wants to know that there has to be some urgent and compelling reason why this money could not go back to pay the workers' money and to have it intact there. And on top of that, the public of Barbados wants to know if it is, as we have learned, that after BTII wrote this letter, the National Insurance Board in convulsions effectively had to agree, because they didn't get paid on the 31st of January. The Minister of Finance then sends them a letter of comfort, saying, don't mind, we will assure you that central government will pay this money, but this letter of comfort is only valid for February and March, to March 31st. In other words, in 2 weeks' time. Well, I trust and pray that the $55 million will be paid by March 31st. Because remember, BTII asked for it to be extended by 18 months. But the letter of comfort from the Minister of Finance, who by all rights, why Didn't the Minister of Finance go to a commercial bank in Bridgetown and get the letter of comfort and pay back the workers the money, would he? Because that would have been the appropriate thing to do. Because the people who bridge financing are commercial banks every day. So what is it about Barbados' financial and economic condition that you could not go and get the letter of comfort from Bridgetown, a bank in town, but you are asking the NIS to hold this letter of comfort instead of getting on with the business of appropriate investments for the workers' money so that they can pay the people's pensions in order in a seamless way. This is not acceptable in this country. And the sad thing is, day by day and week by week, we are bombarded with circumstances such as this. So that when I tell you that any discussion that comes to paint and talk idle numbers that are not real in this book this week, the Barbados Labour Party will not be there with them on that matter. But we want to hear about how you can project a deficit running up and the hospital not getting through. How you can project a deficit running up and basic services, water. 25% of this country's population still can't get access to proper running water. But you will now, in addition to that, also want to put at risk other institutions that should be doing well. You know, the governor of the central bank, and I will speak more on this tomorrow, not tonight, like the Minister of Finance, who has become rash by nature and by his words, his behavior in the back page this today. The lady says, this is my view on the Barbados economy. And all of a sudden, we have a Minister of Finance accusing her of scaremongering and almost behaving like he on a block. But if you feel that way, tell me what loans you got that you're going to cut. That's not the behavior of a Minister of Finance. But what is of more concern to me is that the governor of the central bank would have said the same thing in Brooklyn last week, a few days ago, where he said, look, we are not dealing with any restructuring of debt, but it is what else the governor said that was most interesting. Because the governor went on to say that if we were to do that, we still have not fixed the underlying problems with the deficit. This is their governor of the central bank, you know. And the greatest, therefore, admission of guilt that the government has come nowhere close to solving the